Greetings. Do what thou wilt shall be the whole of the law. I'm Lexi Eve, and welcome to the next Magic in Theory and Practice video. Today we're going over Chapter 18, Part 1 of 2, and the chapter covers clairvoyance and the body of light, its powers and its development, and also concerning divination. But I'm going to cover divination by itself in the Part 2 video. So let's define what these three things are to begin. Clairvoyance utilizes one's psychic faculties that are beyond sensory perception in order to receive information about the future, past, or to answer a question. This, in my view, relates to the neshama, which is Hebrew for intuitive part of the soul, and corresponds with bina, above the abyss. So it's connected in a state of union with the supernal realm and everything divine that is in the higher parts of one's soul. The body of light is one's astral body and also their aura, which is an egg-shaped sphere of light that surrounds the physical body. And people say if you stretch out your arms, equal length horizontal to the ground, that's about the perimeter of your aura. So, about 3 feet, 4 feet in all ways around you. Divination is the act of using a tool to receive the same types of information as would a clairvoyant who does not use an external tool. And now, because this chapter is very long, again, I'm breaking it into 2 parts, and divination will be covered in the next video. Okay, let's paraphrase the opening of this chapter and make it simple. Within every being is a body of light that is approximately the same shape as the physical body which it dwells within. And this also goes for inanimate objects. Everything that's in the physical world has an underlying astral body or body of light that could be affected. Only the body of light is elastic and easily changed, unlike the physical body, which takes time and either working out or, it's changed in physical manners. And the body of light can be shaped by a magician who has mastered the powers of the astral realm. In fact, this inner body of light is also affected by karma and will. And given enough time in one shape, the outer body will attempt to conform to the body of light, so far as a physical body can change. If the body of light is affected by overeating through the physical body, its karma is that it will get larger, and thus the outer body becomes harder to reduce in size and weight due to the body of light retaining the larger form for so long. A person who wishes to affect their facial structure can within small margins by working on the body of light. Now, you can't do things like make your nose or ears grow abnormally just by willing the body of light's nose and ears to the size of, say, an elephant's, but it is possible to take on perhaps more attractive features, such as raising the cheekbones or over time giving the cheeks dimples, slightly adjusting one's jawline, merely by holding the astral form of what you desire the outer body to conform to over a long enough period of time. In my experience, cartilage is difficult to change by morphing the body of light, but shifting bone structure for some reason is much easier. Crowley then writes point blank, the body of light is not real in the physical sense, but neither is the physical body real, as the only thing real is truth, and capital T truth, and that is beyond the abyss. In fact, everything is inherently a lie and not what it is labeled or appears to be to the senses, or at least contains within it the idea of its opposite or contradiction. So if I say love, the idea of hate, its opposite, is directly connected to love. By bringing these two polar opposites into union, neither can exist, and we reach a zero state. Love and hate have canceled each other out. This becomes a mental practice in the Lima to, quote, balance against each thought its exact opposite, for the marriage of these is the annihilation of illusion, end quote, and that's from the Heart of the Master. Ultimately, this practice reveals something about the nature of the initial thing that is impossible to understand without its relation of the opposite to it. The adept in Tifereth identifies with, quote, the immortal Osiris, yet the magician dies. In this dilemma, the facts must be restated. One should preferably say that the magician becomes conscious of that part of himself which he calls the immortal Osiris, and that part does not die, end quote. Now, this immortal part is the soul, which is a complex organ with many parts. But for this topic, let us also say that the astral body is much closer to the immortal part of the magician than their physical body. Death itself is an illusion, as what we are goes on, and all the easier if we have trained the mind not to identify with the sense of self with one's body. But Crowley has brought us far off subject. So this brings us back to the body of light. Eliphas Levi writes extensively about the astral light, so forgive me if this short video does not meet the standards set by his book Dogma and Ritual, but for space, we shall do our best. The body of light is essentially an astral form that resembles exactly the physical body. It is easily changed in shape and form with a mere thought backed up by will. And though tethered to the physical body, it is capable of leaving this physical body behind and venturing out into the ether. Quote, "It can, for example, pass through matter, and it can move freely in every direction through space." End quote. It exists on its own plane, slightly higher than the physical realm, but low enough that through the astral eyes one can see many things on the physical plane. But of course, working with the astral body requires training. Once one can utilize their body of light, it is much easier to see things on the astral plane, as it is the home of the body of light. Though it must be noted that, quote, "this astral plane is so varied and so changeable that several clairvoyants looking at the same thing might give totally different accounts of what they saw. Yet they might each make correct deductions," end quote. This is like several people looking at a mountain from different points around its base, and all describing the same mountain, yet the descriptions are widely varied, yet all are correct. Having explained that, let's get on to clairvoyance. Indirectly, this chapter insinuates that the powers of the clairvoyant are related to the body of light. One taps into this apparatus and is able to see things. It is quite possibly the case, as I hold the notion clairvoyance and most psychic ability requires one to tap into the ajna, their third eye, which is an energy center located on the brow line, and it allows one to perceive what is vulgarly called spiritual. But we are occultists, and as scientists, we must be more specific. Yes, the third eye must then be an energy center connected to the brain, which transmits what is seen through the eyes of the body of light to the physical brain. And sometimes what we see on the astral is so clear that one actually sees the vision with their eyes of both the physical body and the body of light at the same time. So, to summarize about the body of light, it can be molded in any form, but it has a base state that is in the same shape of the body exactly. One can leave their physical body in the body of light, allowing one to astral travel, going to various other planes, or even remain on the physical plane and go anywhere instantly, even through walls or floors, etc. Another power of the body of light is God form assumption as outlined in Libra O. One starts by envisioning that the image of a chosen God is coinciding with their body, enveloping or overlaying their physical self. From there, with enough practice, it becomes easy to grasp one's body of light and mold it into the shape of the God form. Lastly, via the body of light, one can see all types of visions, be they orbs of light, shapes, forms, other beings, or full-on visions that are like seeing a movie. These symbols can be interpreted, and with enough practice, one can learn that when they see a certain thing, it has a specific meaning to them, and this becomes like interpreting omens. One might then theoretically even learn to see the past or future as well as the present. Back to clairvoyance, quote, "The only way to test clairvoyance is to keep a careful record of every experiment made." For example, Frater O.M. once gave a clairvoyant a waistcoat to psychometrize. He made 56 statements about the owner of the waistcoat. Of these, 4 were notably correct. 17, though correct, were of that class of statement which is true of almost everybody. The remainder were wrong. It was concluded from this that he showed no evidence of any special power. In fact, his bodily eyes, if he could discern tailoring, would have served him better, for he thought the owner of the vest was a corn chandler instead of an earl as he is, end quote. So the moral of this story is, beware of charlatans and delusional folk who fancy they have powers that they don't. Quote, "The magician can hardly take too much trouble to develop this power in himself. It is extremely useful to him in guarding himself against attack, in obtaining warnings, in judging character, and especially in watching the process of his ceremonies," end quote. Once you learn to interpret your own personal omens that you perceive through this power, you will see life so much differently. You might receive warnings of danger or know instantly if someone is trustworthy or what kind of character defect they possess. In Liber E, Chapter 2 or Section 2 is titled Physical Clairvoyance. The practice consists of using a tarot pack and drawing one card at a time. By only looking at the back of the card, you make a guess at what card it is. If this is completely new to you, you begin by trying to distinguish what suit the card is, whether wands, cups, swords, disc, or a trump card. Then, when you are guessing about 22 cards correct out of the entire pack of 78, you can move on to guessing the exact card. At this new phase, if you guess a card, but the actual card has a sympathetic, planetary, zodiacal, or elemental correspondence, you can mark it as half correct or semi-correct and give yourself a half point. So you keep going with this practice every day, multiple times a day, and eventually you will train your clairvoyant abilities and begin to feel the card. You may even see it in your mind's eye. You will know the feeling of Mars or Mercury emanating from the card, and even be able to tell more specifically its full associations. For example, such as how the 8 of Discs is Sol in Virgo. It is good training for how to distinguish the energy of elements, planets, and zodiac. And again, in time, you will feel each card. And so when you practice theurgy after doing this practice, and you invoke such forces, you will have the experience of what they feel like when they are present. And that's very helpful to know that you've invoked the correct thing, that it came. Crowley then writes that for the new practitioner, scrying is not a helpful method of training clairvoyance because it is passive and because you are shown things that are probably irrelevant. Quote, "The proper method is as follows. Develop the body of light until it is just as real to you as your other body. Teach it to travel to any desired symbol and enable it to perform all necessary rites and invocations. In short, educate it. Ultimately, the relation of that body with your own must be exceedingly intimate. But before this harmonizing takes place, you should begin by a careful differentiation. The first thing to do, therefore, is to get the body outside your own. To avoid muddling the two, you begin by imagining a shape resembling yourself standing in front of you. Do not say, 'Oh, it's only imagination.' The time to test that is later on, when you have secured a fairly clear mental image of such a body. Try to imagine how your own body would look if you were standing in its place. Try to transfer your consciousness to the body of light. Your own body has its eyes shut. Use the eyes of the body of light to describe the objects in the room behind you. Don't say, 'It's only an effort of subconscious memory.' The time to test that is later on. As soon as you feel more or less at home in the fine body, let it rise in the air. Keep on feeling the sense of rising. Keep on looking about you as you rise until you see landscapes or beings of the astral plane. Such have a quality all their own. They are not like material things. They are not like mental pictures. They seem to lie between the two. After some practice has made you adept, so that in the course of an hour's journey you can reckon on having a fairly eventful time, turn your attention to reaching a definite place on the astral plane. Invoke Mercury, for example, and examine carefully your record of the resulting vision. Discover whether the symbols which you have seen on this journey correspond with the conventional symbols of Mercury. This testing of the spirits is the most important branch of the whole tree of magic. Without it, one is lost in the jungle of delusion. Every spirit, up to God himself, is ready to deceive you if possible, to make himself out more important than he is. In short, to lay in wait for your soul in 333 separate ways. In projecting the astral, it is a valuable additional safeguard to perform the whole operation in a properly consecrated circle. Proceed with great caution then, but proceed. In time, your body of light will be as strong against spirits as your other body against the winds of heaven. All depends upon the development of that body of light." End quote. Before continuing my script, I just want to say, testing your magic and really putting it on the acid test, examining your record carefully, looking for evidence that what you're doing is magical, not mere coincidence, not delusion, is very important. We try to treat, as Thelemites, the occult as a science. So when you do your invocations, when you do rituals, when you're doing astral journeys, you are looking for every bit of evidence to prove that it was not your imagination, it was not mere coincidence. You're paying attention to the ceremony, you're paying attention to what feels correct through whatever you've invoked to make sure that it's really present, and then you pay attention afterwards to make sure that whatever the intention was came into fruition. All of that evidence builds up over time, and it gives you this sense of certainty that what you were doing actually worked and is not just taking place in your head, and that's very important. Also, there are many ways to test spirits, and that includes, when you're on the astral plane interacting with one, saying a holy phrase which has a response, and making sure that the spirit, or whatever it is, responds accordingly. So do what thou wilt should be the whole of the law. These entities should be able to respond, love is the law, love under will. You might have another key phrase that should have some type of response, and if these things don't have that response, if they are afraid of divine names for some reason, there's indicators, and you should immediately banish it. You can also get the name and do the gematria, and this is especially helpful if you have a scribe sitting there with you that can work out the results on paper and then analyze the number really quick and make sure that this is not a deceptive or malicious spirit. If it is malevolent, again, banish it immediately. Use divine names and cast pentagrams at it, banishing pentagrams. Once you have gotten a solid grasp on the astral, your eyes will be open to a deeper reality than the physical one you had been imprisoned in prior. But now comes the testing of the actual vision as a whole. If you travel through a planetary astral door, everything you encounter should be harmonious with that planet. If you travel through the physical realm, have someone set up a few things in another location, go there on the astral and endeavor to see and report everything you saw. If it was not merely your imagination, you will have seen whatever was really in the location you traveled to. There are more methods, but for now this suffices. Always test your magic. Always watch for the outcome in the days, weeks, months that follow. Another training method mentioned by Crowley in this chapter is rising on the planes. Be seated in your asana and get a steady flow of breath. Enter your astral body and see yourself rising straight up. You may see beings and you may converse with them, but always seek to go on up, up, up in a straight line, so far until fatigue overwhelms you utterly, and then return to your body, recording in your diary everything that occurred. So in this chapter, he actually writes Libra O, section 5, perhaps even part of section 6, but you should go to Libra O, read sections 5 and 6, and you could get more detail about this practice. In addition to what's outlined in Libra O, you can also go to any plane, some of which are mentioned in a moment in this chapter. But in addition to those planes, you can also go to any Sephiroth or Kabbalistic path, take an astral journey through each of the spheres, each of the paths, and see visions which should correspond with what is laid out in the magician's tables. By doing so, you begin to incorporate all of these experiences, energies, and memories into your astral body, fortifying it each time with new and more potent concentrations of the energy, be they element, planetary, or other. Scrying the 30 aethers of the Enochian system may be classified in this field as well, as you are utilizing the same parts of perception to see the visions of each aether, which must be invoked with the Enochian keys. But keep in mind, with this latter practice, quote, it is not enough to invoke the place you wish to visit, because you may not be able to endure its pressure or to breathe its atmosphere. Several instances occur in that record where the seer was unable to pass through certain gateways or to remain in certain contemplations. He had to undergo certain initiations before he was able to proceed. Thus, it is necessary that the technique of magic should be perfected. The body of light must be rendered capable of going everywhere and doing everything. It is, therefore, always the question of drill, which is of uttermost importance. You have to go out, rising on the planes every day of your life, year after year. You are not to be disheartened by failure or too much encouraged by success in any one practice or set of practices. What you are doing is what will be of real value to you in the end, and that is developing a character, creating a karma, which will give you the power to do your will. End quote. My personal greatest experiment of the traditional Libra O outlined experiment was really extraordinary. I went for over an hour and a half, seated in my asana. At some point, I was moving at what felt like light speed or perhaps greater, as there are not the same physical restrictions that you experience in the real world as opposed to the astral. Now, eventually in this travel, I found a border of the universe, and I intuited that it was a boundary of the physical universe, and I went through it. What I saw was a bubbling gray void with spherical shapes connected to each other, and they were green, red, and blue. And they were kind of moving up and down in a circular motion, many of them, and there was many layers of these spheres going in circular motions around and around, on and on in rows, all moving with the motion of a blanket that one hurls to catch up air under it as you try to make your bed. Kind of like the motion of water or the motion of a parachute catching air over and over again as you hurl it back and forth, up and down. I instinctively knew that each sphere I saw was itself its own universe, and this place was possibly infinite, meaning I believe I glimpsed the multiverse from a place between universes, a spiritual plane between universes where the unity of everything was melding into itself. I was so small, I could only see maybe 20 or 40 of these giant spheres, all bobbing around and going in rows and circular motions around each other. But I could tell just intuitively that they went on seemingly to infinity. At that point, after a while, I went back to my own body, traveling back as quickly as possible, perhaps 40 minutes or so to get there and 40 minutes or so to get back. Quote, "Now, however unsuccessful your getting out of the body may apparently have been, it is most necessary to use every effort to bring it back properly. Make the body of light coincide in space with your physical body, assume the God form, and vibrate the name of Harpocrates with the utmost energy. Then recover unity of consciousness. If you fail to do this properly, you may find yourself in serious trouble. Your body of light may wander away uncontrolled and be attacked and obsessed. You'll become aware of this through the occurrence of headache, bad dreams, or even more serious signs such as hysteria, fainting fits, possibly madness, or paralysis. Even the worst of these attacks will probably wear off, but it may leave you permanently damaged to a greater or less extent," end quote. And again, quote, "With a little practice, especially if you have a good guru, you ought to be able to slip in and out of your astral body as easily as you slip in and out of a dressing gown. It will then no longer be so necessary for your astral body to be sent far off. Without moving an inch, you will be able to turn on its eyes and ears, as simply as the man with the microscope, mentioned above, can transfer his complete attention from one eye to the other," end quote. More recently, when discussing magic with people, usually with someone who has a few questions, I find not only am I relying on the information I've read from books over the years, nor experience from the rituals I have performed, but lately, after a question is posed, I usually turn on my spiritual sensory, which is connected with my mind, and enter that right state where I can intuit the information. For example, it just happened today as I write this script. Someone was asking about the color scales and a ritual, and it led to a discussion about doing a Jupiter-based ritual. I found myself instantly activating the body of light and connecting with Jupiter, intuiting what it would most like performed in a ritual to it, and I got some very colorful answers, all of which were checked after the fact with reference material, and definitely found to be acceptable when it comes to Jupiterian type workings. Quote, "To recapitulate once more then, the first task is to develop your own body of light within your own circle without reference to any other inhabitants of the world to which it belongs. That which you have accomplished with the subject you may now proceed to do with the object. You will learn to see the astral appearance of material things, and although it does not properly belong to pure clairvoyance, one may here again mention that you should endeavor to the utmost to develop and fortify this body of light. The best and simplest way to do this is to use it constantly, to exercise it in every way. In particular, it may be employed in ceremonies of initiation or of invocation, while the physical body remains silent and still. In doing this, it will often be necessary to create a temple on the astral plane. It is excellent practice to create symbols. This one precaution is needed. After using them, they should be reabsorbed." End quote for a second. So if you create things on the astral plane, after you're done working, bring that light back into you. That's what he's saying. Don't just leave it there. Your temple, after you're done using it, should always be shut down, so to speak. Any energy that you put into your circle, you always want to take back in. Continue, quote, having learned to create astral forms, the next step will be at first very difficult. Phantasmal and fleeting as the astral is in general, those forms which are definitely attached to the material possess enormous powers of resistance, and it consequently requires very high potential to influence them. The material analogs seem to serve as a fortress. Even when a temporary effect is produced, the inertia of matter draws it back to the normal. Yet, the power of the trained and consecrated will in a well-developed astral body is such that it can even produce a permanent change in the material upon whose body of light you are working. E.g., one can heal the sick by restoring a healthy appearance to their astral forms. On the other hand, it is possible so to disintegrate the body of light even of a strong man that he will fall dead. End quote. And this right here makes me think of transubstantiation, the transmutation of the cake of light and cup of wine into the body of God and blood of the saints. By affecting the astral within these things, making them spiritually charged to give you communion with God, they take on that power and become charged, become changed. Of course, I'm using cryptic phrases, and what I'm speaking of is rather complex. You have to partake of this experience and witness it enough times after being trained to see what change is taking place, and then practice in making the change occur yourself. Words aren't going to do justice to the experience, and without proper training, no performance of the Mass will have any potency in this regard, no matter how many times an ignorant person makes an attempt. Without going through the training under proper guidance, you will only be eating bread and consuming wine unless you know how to affect the change and make it occur. Besides that, working with these forces can be dangerous. Traveling can allow other entities to attack you, and working upon some physical thing's astral form can cause destruction to its physical representation. To paraphrase the next two paragraphs of the chapter, be careful and know your own limits. You may try healing someone who has a serious malady but only appears mildly ill, only to find yourself overwhelmed by the totality of what actually plagues them. The force you exert upon their unmovable sickness may rebound back upon you, though if you are capable of handling that force, you may be able to overcome the resistance. But if you are not, it will certainly hurt you. It's like trying to lift something that's too heavy, you're going to throw your back out. Also, Crowley mentions an example of this, Anna Kingsford, and that she and Edward Maitland attempted to do harm to two people, and he outlines what happened. So one was a mundane person they attempted to kill, but only made him very seriously ill. The other, Louis Pasteur, they tried doing the same to, only it failed, for he had enough magical prowess to overcome the total force they could exert together. And according to Crowley, Pasteur also had the blessings of countless people who followed him. So that extra magical charge of goodwill coming from his followers helped to stave off the magical attack completely. And let me also say, Crowley describes these two people as black magicians. They are not brothers and sisters of the magic of light. They are black magicians. Lowly, shitty people, put it that way. The following quote ends the first section of this chapter. Quote, to sum up, the first task is to separate the astral form from the physical body. The second, to develop the powers of the astral body, in particular those of sight, travel, and interpretation. Third, to unify the two bodies without muddling them. This being accomplished, the magician is fitted to deal with the invisible. End quote. Section 2 begins, quote, it is now useful to continue with considerations of other planes, which have commonly been classed under the astral. There is some reason for this, as the delimitations are somewhat vague. Just as the vegetable kingdom merges into the animal, and as the material plane has beings which encroach upon the boundaries of the astral, so do we find in the higher planes. The mental images which appear during meditation are subjective and pertain not at all to the astral plane. Only very rarely do astral images occur during meditation. It is a bad break in the circle as a rule when they do. There is also a magical plane. This touches the material and even includes a portion of it. It includes the astral, chiefly a full-blooded type of the astral. It reaches to and includes most, if not all, of the spiritual planes. The magical plane is thus the most comprehensive of all. Egyptian gods are typical inhabitants of this plane, and it is the home of every adept. The spiritual planes are of several types, but are all distinguished by a reality and intensity to be found nowhere else. Their inhabitants are formless, free of space and time, and distinguished by incomparable brilliance. There are also a number of subplanes, as, for example, the alchemical. This plane will often appear in the practice of rising on the plains. Its images are usually those of gardens, curiously kept, mountains furnished with peculiar symbols, hieroglyphic animals, or such figures as that of the Hermetic Arcanum, and pictures like the Gold Seekers and the Massacre of Innocents of Basil Valentine. There is a unique quality about the alchemical plane, which renders its images immediately recognizable. There are also planes corresponding to various religions past and present, all of which have their peculiar unity. It is of the utmost importance to the clairvoyant, or traveler in the fine body, to be able to find his way to any desired plane and operate therein as its ruler. The neophyte of AA is examined most strictly in this practice before they are passed to the degree of zealator." End quote. And then Crowley comes back to the topic of rising on planes. In short, the mundane person is used to being on the lowest of all planes, and will have great difficulty reaching higher ones. But the greatest training of this body of light is magic itself. Exposure to various forces over time is like spiritual strength training. Theurgy, ceremonial magic, yoga, all of the highest practices. Each one strengthens the body of light, and in time, success will become possible when attempting astral travel. Quote, "Similarly, the powers gained in this way will strengthen the magician in his meditation practices. His will becomes better able to assist the concentration, to destroy the mental images which disturb it, and to reject the lesser rewards of that practice which tempt and too often stop the progress of the mystic." End quote. Next comes something I alluded to earlier. Quote, "Although it is said that the spiritual lies beyond the astral, this is theoretical." End quote. So, is the astral the same as the spiritual? Is it the same as spirit? Or is it its own thing, lower than spirit, but higher than the physical? Well, in the spirit of science, I believe categorizing everything perfectly is quite important. One thing I truly appreciate about Hindu yoga is the very fine detail they make in analyzing and labeling every minute spiritual concept, down to the smallest parts. So in short, yes, the astral light is, in my opinion, like a lower manifestation of the divine light of Kether, but higher than the physical body. And the spirit of man, in my opinion, is better classified through the entire tree of life, each part placed in its own path. The higher up the part is, the closer it is to the source of creation. Even the idea of the Ka, Kabs, and Ku helps in analyzing the astral and spiritual realms. I look at the Ku as the body of light and outer aura, that which makes one alive, and somewhat comparable to prana as a life force. The Kabs is like the Ruach, seated in the several spheres in the tree of life, in the center of the tree of life, but especially Tifereth, the star Sol in the very center, comparable with the heart as a spiritual symbol. Then, the Ka is the spark of divine light, the kernel of the Ein Sof, which exists in the heart, in the center of one's being, much like Hadith is, quote, "the flame that burns in every heart of man and in the core of every star," end quote. So, is the spiritual beyond the astral? I tend to think of the astral light as a lower manifestation of the divine light. In a sense, it is connected with the spirit, but it is not the whole spirit itself. If anything, the spirit resides within man, within the astral, on a deeper level, operating through it. Crowley mentions the ethers, almost seeming to allude to strengthening the body of light as a means to pierce the veils of the deeper ethers beyond the 15th. He says that one must train in order to be able to go so deep, else they can try, and like Prometheus, face the consequences of attempting to take the flame of Olympus, though they are unworthy. Further, that, quote, "the gods are the enemies of man. It is nature that man must overcome ere he enter into his kingdom," end quote. The angels are only one step beyond man. There's a process to becoming godlike. With training, one can reach equivalency of the angelic brotherhood, and from there, they can rise higher and find unity with the light. It is also said that if you see God as you walk on the path, kill it, because it is not God. All deities, like humans, are emanations of the same source. The Kabbalistic zero has no form, and so any being with form is not of the perpetual state of union, being formlessness. So, what's being said in the above quote is that by systematically rising through the ranks of gods, taking on their best characteristics, we eventually rise in power and surpass them, and at the end is union with the source. And as I've said elsewhere, a magician's power comes from their connection to the divine, so it is of utmost importance to train and nourish your connection with it. So that does it for today. Stay tuned for section 4 of this chapter, where we're going to cover divination as outlined, and we're going to go into many different types of divination and try to do that topic justice. Love is the law, love under will. See you in the next one.